You got barbecue back there, and you didn't invite me. Hurt my feelings.
Welcome back to another Destination Dynasty Quick Hits episode talking quarterback war and the value of your 2025 Superflex rookie draft picks. If you haven't watched the first two parts, go back, check them out on the channel, like, subscribe, leave me comments, try to get back to you with some answers. This is part 3. What you see on the screen is what I left off part 2, talking about the war per game relative to your draft picks. As you can see, I've gone 2 rounds from picks 1 to 24 from a Superflex perspective and looked at the last 5 rookie classes. So starting in 2019 to 2023 and looking at the 2-year average war per game from each one of those draft slots using historic ADP. And this is what you see. And this is what I want to start with, just kind of recapping the relative value of your picks. You can see the regression line, which is that light blue line that goes through all of the plots from picks 1 through 24. I did want to reiterate that I said on the last show, just because a player goes below 0 does not mean that they are a bad pick. It does not mean that they could not be useful. But understand, and this is what we're going to talk about with the quarterback position in this episode, that war is a weekly measurement. We can look at war charts and war graphs from a season-long macro perspective, but we play a week-to-week game. Dynasty, even though it is a long-term game, whether you want to consider that a 3-year game, a 1 to 2 year game, or just a season-long game, it is still managed in week-to-week increments. And I talk about that on the first 2 episodes, but this is just a reminder. You can see what to relatively expect from each one of these picks from a war per game perspective. It's not that high. At the very, very top, you're looking at about 0.07 war from the number 1 overall pick. And when I show you some of these charts, you'll see where that really isn't that high, relatively speaking, depending on what you can do with those picks. But let's start looking at a couple of these graphs. So I want to pull up, the first thing is the war graph. You can type in the war tool, ddfantasyfootball.com, put in Charles Chill FFB and bring up the roster construction series. That is what I use for all of these shows. It is a 12-team start 11 lineup league with 1.75 tight end premium. This is looking at the war per game last year. And this is weeks 14 through 17. And the reason I want to show you this, because I want to then compare it to what you would look at for an entire season. So this is weeks 14 and 17, or 14 through 17. And the reason I'm showing you that is because one thing we know about the quarterback position is there is attrition as the season goes on. Not just from an injury perspective, but from this quarterback has contractual reasons why they don't play. This quarterback has lost their job. This quarterback has been benched. This quarterback has taken over because a team wants to see if maybe they can be their future backup. You can think of situations where all of those has applied. There have been an average of 61 quarterbacks that have started a game over the last 5 years. It peaked at 69. The lowest number was 59. So you can probably go into the season expecting around 60 quarterbacks start. That's not 32 starters. That's 60 plus starters. That is average. Almost 2 quarterbacks per team are going to start a game. Now there's going to be some where there's 2, where there's 3, where there's 4. There's guys signed off the street that start. So it's a little bit of a fluid process trying to predict who those starters and who those backups are going to be. But the point is, there's 60 plus quarterbacks that you can expect to start every year. And the reason I wanted to show you this is because this is probably closer to what you would expect the war distribution to look like when you get towards the end of the season. So obviously, if you're looking up here, this is where your elite guys from last year are going to sit. Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Baker Mayfield, Joe Burrow, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts. So from a per game perspective, during weeks 14 through 17, the guys that you wanted, the guys that are up at 0.1 per game are up here. And remember, that 0.1 per game compared to this, I'm going to put it back up, compared to the 101, which is about 0.61 or 0.66, so less than 0.07 per game. Compared to these guys, the elite quarterbacks. But here's where it's fascinating. It's obvious that if you have one of these elite quarterbacks, you're starting them every week. It probably cripples your team if they get injured. They're not replaceable with a trade. They're not replaceable with some savvy move that you make to kind of get replacement level production for those guys and slide somebody else as impactful. If you throw in, let's just put the receivers back in here. You really can't afford to lose one of those quarterbacks. And unless you're literally trading those guys for elite players at other positions, we can throw the running backs in there as well. You're not really replacing it. So once you get rid of those, my focus is down here. This is where the rookie draft pick value comes in, talking through the quarterback position and kind of where to take swings and where it might make sense. We'll get to that here in just a second. But look at this. Look how far of a drop it was. All the way down here to quarterback 10. When you get to quarterback 10, it really starts to drop off. You're talking about 0.7 WAR per game. And then it drops off down here to where if you're at quarterback 12, 13, 14, you're down at about quarterback 15 to everybody else. You're basically at the same thing. This was 0.03 at quarterback 30. This was 0.05 at quarterback 15. And then when you bring up the other chart, which I want to show here, this is for the entire 2024 season, or per game for the entire 2024 season. If you notice, it's a little bit higher in this range, and that makes sense, right? Because as some quarterbacks fall off the map a little bit, you start to see that, I guess you would call it, advantage level be a little bit higher for the full season than it would be towards the end of the year when you started to see some attrition take over. But it really doesn't change here, right? Like this is looking for the full season. What do you see? Quarterback 15 all the way down here to quarterback 30. So you're kind of looking at the same range over two different time spans to tell me this is probably, and the reason I'm showing this, and then I'll go to some more charts where you can really get an idea of kind of what this rookie class looks like. This range, let's just call it quarterback 15 through 30. That is where a lot of the ambiguous quarterback names reside. The ones where you're probably going, I don't really know how to value that guy. I'm really probably basing their dynasty value or their trade value based on their longevity. But if you're sitting here with a quarterback, say, Trevor Lawrence is probably a good example. Bryce Young's another good example. Those guys have had a little bit of steam upwards in terms of their dynasty value. But if you're just assuming that their production is going to be outside the top 12, maybe even outside the top 15, this is where they sit. So just understand, this is probably where you start seeing some replacement level guys slide in on a 1, 2, 4, 6 game basis if they just get these starts. Mason Rudolph, look at that, quarterback 27. Tyler Huntley, quarterback 26. Now, again, those guys weren't obvious starts every single week. But when you start seeing names like that in there, it kind of tells you that you can probably find replacement level quarterback value or replacement level quarterback production in that range. Now, let's look at the total WAR for the season, and this is where it's really, really staggering. Look how flat it is. And this gets down to the range down in here where you're at less than 0.5 WAR for the entire year. And I'm going to bring that chart up one more time. So less than 0.5 for the entire year. And this was, where were we sitting at? We were at CJ Stroud last year, quarterback 20, 0.53 total WAR for the season. And we're talking about a guy that played every game. And let's bring up that rookie pick chart. There it is one more time. Boom. So if you're telling me I'm getting 0.53, and if you had CJ Stroud, what did you do? You started him every week, right? So not only did he give you quarterback 20 in WAR, but you started it every week. So you were essentially locking in quarterback 20 production and ended up getting, let's just call it 0.03 WAR per game from that guy, and you started him 100% of the time. So that 0.53 that Stroud had for the season, that's what you got at the position. You go back to this rookie pick chart. Like if you just take some of these picks and you go, okay, if on average, let's just go to the 112, because people always say, well, what do I do with that 112? I'm not going to be able to get a quarterback this year, and I'll show the ADP here in just a second from Keep Trade Cut. 112. So you're talking about, what, .028 WAR per game for the first 2 years of a player's career at the 112. Now, you may say, well, there's not going to be a quarterback there. But again, that's probably right in the range of the equivalent of what you were paying for that replacement level quarterback production. So when you phrase it in those terms, essentially what you're doing is saying that a lot of those quarterbacks are maybe worth a mid to late first. The WAR says it's about a late first, 110, 111, 112. Yet they're worth more than that on the market because of why? The dynasty value, right? Like if I have Bryce Young or I have CJ Stroud or I have Trevor Lawrence, I don't have to worry about doing anything with that slot. I feel good. And sure, I can talk myself into how every single one of those guys that I prefer, whether it's those three, or it's Dak Prescott, or it's Brock Purdy, or it's Jared Goff, or whoever it is, or it's Tua. I mean, name the player between quarterback 11 and 25 that you tell me you think, oh, well, that guy could bounce back. That guy could have one of his better seasons. That guy could be a top 10, top 12 quarterback. Sure, there's some that are probably better bets than others. But when you've been in that range for a couple of years, like a guy like T-Law or a guy like Bryce Young has shown for his entire career, odds are that's probably where he will stay. So essentially, you are overpaying for just, I don't have to touch that position for a couple of years. When in reality, when you go back to this specific chart, this tells me that I can pretty much find replacement level quarterback production with some spot starts. I'm going to go back to the WAR per game in here. I mean, this is quarterback 15, but when you go even lower, quarterback 20, basically quarterback 20 to 30, there's no difference. Zero. Quarterback 15 to quarterback 30, not a huge difference. Yet the ADP would tell you something entirely different. So let's take a look at the top 12 currently on Keep Trade Cut. So we have Cam Ward going at the 103. So obviously with Ward at the 103, that's probably going to be one of those guys that because of his draft capital, because he's seen as the clear QB1, is he overpriced? Like, again, I'm just asking the question and kind of sitting here and rhetorically saying, is he overpriced? Because if you go back and look at this, right here, 103, expected WAR per game from the 103, 0.052. 0.052. Now, you go back to this chart. I'm sorry, I'm flipping so many screens here. You go back to this chart and you look at the WAR per game. Where do you get the 0.052 slot? Probably right in here. Yeah, so I mean, right there, Cam Ward's got to be quarterback 15 or higher immediately. Quarterback 12. And that comes with some opportunity costs with these picks. Because right here, you go back to the top 12, you're drafting him over. I mean, this is using Keep Trades Cuts, Superflex rankings, or Superflex ADP, whatever you want to call it. And I did turn on the Tight End Plus premium for the use of this, but you can argue whether it's Hampton or Ted McMillan or Travion Henderson or whatever you want to put at that 102 or 103. But it's one of those guys, right? It's probably McMillan versus the RB3, whoever you think that is, Judkins, Henderson, McMillan, sure. But there's some opportunity cost, right? And so if you're thinking about Cam Ward at the 103, and you just look at what's expected of a player from that draft slot relative to the quarterback production and what it looks like, it's a pretty expensive bet on Cam Ward that he's just top 12. He's got to be probably 15 or better from a quarterback production standpoint in his first 2 years to really make sense picking that high. Let's go to the next quarterback. We have Shedeur Sanders at the 109. Let's go back to the 109 here. So here we are at the 109. If you go to the 109 rookie pick, right around 0.034. Okay. That kind of puts us back in that replacement value. That's not that different than that 112 example that I gave just a second ago. And here you go. Back to the WAR per game for 2024. And you can see this. You can go down to the 3-year average. And you see 3-year average. It's easier to talk in per game. So I'm going to go back to that, even though it's only a 1-year sample size. Again, the 0.34 or 0.034, that puts you down in this range for Shedeur Sanders. And again, When people say I'd rather have Cam Ward, let's just assume, I actually want to show this because this makes some sense or put some data to it. This is Mock Draft Database, pulling together hundreds of mock drafts and taking the big board value or the ADP. You may not like Shedeur Sanders. You may listen to the draft pundits that say he shouldn't go in the top 10. He's not a first-round quarterback. But this says differently. Now, that's not what we're debating, but let's say he does go to the Browns, to the Giants. Team trades up a couple spots. Who knows? But let's assume he goes just in the top 10, let alone top 3, top 2. If that happens, then all of a sudden we start looking back at the WAR per game again, right here. His ADP was the 109. There it is. 0.034. So in my estimation, just measuring this, there's just some bias. There's some bias with Cam Ward at 103, Shedeur Sanders at 109. That is just simply, there's some longevity. Maybe there's some bust risk. Maybe there's some likability. Maybe there's some, I don't know, upside. Is it for sure that Shedeur Sanders has no upside? Is it for sure that Cam Ward does? Or is there just some bias? And I'm not advocating to not draft Cam Ward, and I'm not advocating to draft Shedeur Sanders. Let's go to round 2 and look at that. So here we go. This is round 2. Now, this probably changes a little bit with Jaxson Dart at 15. Listen, he's quarterback 28 in Dynasty per keep trade cut. He's at the 203. Now, if you go back to Mock Draft Database, it still has him not quite consensus being in the first round right here. Pick 33, but I'm guessing as we get closer to the draft, that's going to move up. That's going to put him average consensus, probably going to be in the mid-20s. And we know NFL teams overdraft quarterbacks. So let's just assume we have a third quarterback that jumps into this range. His ADP probably moves up, but it probably doesn't move up higher than Shedeur Sanders. It's probably at best, it goes right into this range with Shedeur Sanders at the 109. So let's just say he gets into that 109 through 112 range. Again, unless you can sit here and tell me that Cam Ward has way more upside, I would probably just rather use my picks on non-quarterbacks inside this range, unless, and here's where I want to really show this quarterback data. This is historical data based on where they get taken. And I showed this purposely last because it highlights exactly what I'm talking about. Look at this. This is total WAR for the first 2 years of their career. Stark difference, right? Look at the difference between picks 1 through 4, ADP-wise, and picks 5 through 12, ADP-wise. Not that big of a gap. This was actually shocking to me. This essentially tells you that the first-round quarterback, and here's the thing, we don't even have to analyze whether the quarterback's good or not. The NFL does that for us. We also don't have to push a player up because of draft capital, because we will already do that. ADP will already dictate that. If Jaxson Dart goes in the first round of the NFL draft, he will be a top 12 rookie pick. If Shedeur Sanders goes in the top 10, 15 picks, definitely, even in just the first round, he will be a top 12 rookie pick. And this data tells you that the falling value or the better value pick relative to what you would expect out of these rookie picks is to take a quarterback in the range of that 109 through 112 and not one at the 103, 102, 104, simply because of narrative, of bias, of there's maybe a little more upside. I mean, the difference in WAR, there is a difference, right? You're talking about 0.12 WAR over a course of 2 seasons. And this factors in, again, just the averages that these players from these ranges put up over their first 2 seasons. There's obviously different stories you can tell with different draft classes, different situations, etc. But again, I think it's pretty sticky to see, okay, we typically move a quarterback up in ADP for what? Well, there's just upside, right? Anthony Richardson's going to be a higher pick because, well, he has upside. Cam Ward is seen as he's got a little more upside than Shedeur Sanders. People like him a little bit more. They trust him. But if you come full circle and you go back to this, and I want to kind of end on talking about this again. Oh, wrong one. Let me put up the 3-year WAR average again here. So if you go back to this first slide that I showed, this is replacement value quarterback week 14 through 17 of last year. Look at this line. Look how flat it is. And then if you go over to this one, look at how flat it is still across the entire season. So if this doesn't tell you, and going back to the data that I mentioned, if this doesn't tell you that this is the most replaceable range of quarterbacks out there, and essentially the takeaway from this is, what is the accessibility to a lot of these quarterbacks? Heck, do you even need my argument against drafting Shedeur Sanders or Jaxson Dart with a first-round rookie pick is if you're buying into a quarterback that the community doesn't really love, that you really can't see outperforming the value of your pick, then why not roll with one of these replacement level QBs? Why not, especially, and this is getting a little deeper into roster construction, which I don't necessarily want to do on this show, but especially if you have one of these QBs up here, if you have one of these guys that you consider to be a difference maker. I'm not talking about whether you have CJ Stroud or you have Patrick Mahomes. Like, you can argue they could be a difference maker, Kyler Murray. But if you have one of these guys, if you have Josh Allen, if you have Lamar Jackson, if you have Jaden Daniels, there isn't a better way to play the Superflex position than just play with a replacement value QB. And I'm not talking about go buy a replacement value Tua Tagovailoa. I'm talking about use the AnyQBOnA2Deep strategy to your advantage. Literally just roster a bunch of backups. Maybe as you get closer to the season, you lock in a guy that you know is going to start for the first month. Last year, it was like Gardner Minshew once he won the job for the Raiders to start the year. Just lock that in. That's my QB2. And if you think about that relative to the other person that is just hammering in, that's CJ Stroud last year. I believe he's right around in here somewhere. I think it was quarterback 20 over that last 4 weeks. But the point is, if CJ Stroud is in this replaceable range, he's being started every single week by the person that has him. Every single week he's being started. And think about the value of a guy like Stroud compared to the value of what you can buy this week's flavor of the week spot starter for. Probably a third, maybe less. Maybe you don't even have to pay if you've collected enough of them on your bench. It's going to be pretty clear after the draft. I have AnyQBOnA2Deep Tracker that I maintain for the DD community that literally just looks at all the backup situations, the ones that I'm most likely rostering. And again, a lot of those guys are found on waivers. Ryan Tannehill. Word is Ryan Tannehill could come back and be a backup somewhere. He's free. He's been cut. And if you're in one of these leagues that's a 12 by 11, 12 by 12, 12 by 10 with 25 or more roster spots, think about playing QB this way. Really think about, I'm going to put this up to end the show. Think about playing QB this way and think about some of the QBs that are going to go later on in these drafts. Like, it's going to be hard to click draft on Will Howard over the RB15 that I like, or drafting Riley Leonard over a 4th round running back, or Dylan Gabriel or Kyle McCord. But think about that. There's a reason that the total war for the first 2 years with 2nd round picks in Dynasty typically looks like this. What's the reason? They don't start right away. How many quarterbacks that go in the 2nd round? Because if a quarterback in ADP goes in the 2nd round, it's usually because somebody sees something. They see some potential opportunity. They see some potential upside, or both. But typically when they go in the 2nd round, they don't have a locked-in job. So it makes sense that over time, you're going to see this number much lower than the starters. But if you then extrapolated this out and said, okay, on a per-game basis, let's say this 0.26 is only an 8-game span over that 2-year period, that's right around that 0.3. So you can find the replacement level QBs, and this goes really for quarterbacks after pick 13. You can go into the third round because depending on the class, people are going to push some of the backup quarterbacks to round 3, even round 4 in this year's class. So this just highlights that you can really replace that QB2 on your roster. And going a step further, I'll leave everybody with an actionable strategy takeaway here. Let's say you do have one of these QB rooms, or maybe you don't have Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen or Jaden Daniels, but you have Kyler Murray. You have Pat Mahomes. You have Joe Burrow. You have somebody that you think, okay, if this guy just has its typical season, he's going to be top 10. Maybe even top 5. All of those guys have finished multiple times inside the top 5. But it's not a guarantee. You're not locking them in for top 3 every year. But it's reasonable to think if you have Burrow, if you have Kyler, if you have Mahomes, like they're going to finish top 12. They're going to finish QB7, QB8, QB9. You can still get away with having just a replacement value QB2. So let's say you have a room of Kyler and Dak. Well, the pragmatist in your mind is going to go, well, Dak, if he gets back to his form, he could be QB10. But the reality is Dak probably falls in that replaceable level QB range, but you could probably also sell Dak for a pick. Now, what you don't want to do is sell Dak, and this is why it's so hard to reconcile the value of quarterbacks in these ranges, because you would go, I need a QB2. Let me just go buy Trevor Lawrence. And then you go, well, Trevor Lawrence really isn't worth that much. He doesn't have a lot of upside. I'm going to offer the 112. And then what happens with the trade trap when you offer that person the 112 for T-Law? They probably look at their QB room and go, wait a second. I'm not going to be able to draft a guy better than him at the 112. So let me keep him. So it creates this reserve value that's placed on these replaceable quarterbacks that you can do much more efficiently and much more creatively if you're the one that goes and probably sells those QBs. And I'm not looking to sell Trevor Lawrence for the 110 so that I can draft Shedeur Sanders. I'm looking to do something else with the asset. I'd probably rather take future assets for quarterbacks like that. Because if I take a 26 first, if I take a 27 first, maybe I can get a running back tacked on. Maybe I can get a lesser quarterback tacked on, which just helps me with that replaceable level QB. If I can get Matt Stafford thrown in, all that does is help me perpetuate at a lower price, at a lowest common denominator price at my QB2 position, the strategy of just replacing that QB2 year over year, week over week. But what it allows me to also do is re-roll that pick for something potentially higher. So yeah, I don't want to sell Bryce Young for the 112. I don't want to sell Jordan Love for the 110. I don't want to sell Dak or T-Law for the 109. Because I'm just spinning my wheels, right? It's a 1-for-1. There's no leverage. There's no ability to get ahead in life by making that type of deal. So think about that when you're building your QB room, especially if you have one of these higher end QBs, top 5, top 6, top 7, top 8, and you're really expecting like top 10 or better production, like you're already locking that in. Think about how you're building your QB room around that QB1. Think about, do you really want to hold premier value in Brock Purdy? Do you really want to hold premier value in T-Law or Jordan? Let me name the quarter. CJ Stroud, Justin Herbert. Those are the two names that come to mind that are in that value range. There's no guarantee those guys are going to deliver fantasy production well above that replacement level range. Yet in Dynasty, they're QB 6, 7, because they're young and good NFL quarterbacks. But there's just a big disconnect between replacement value quarterback production and Dynasty market value. If you like this video, hit me up in the comments. All of this information is housed over at ddfantasyfootball.com. Join the community, link in the description, 50% off for the first month. Once you're in there, you won't want to leave. You can also get access to the war tool that I shared at ddfantasyfootball.com. You try that along with the subscription package that you get for the first month, and you won't want to go back. So keep me up in the comments. Part 4 will be coming next week, talking another position, but this was a deep dive on quarterback war, kind of how I view this through the lens of the 2025 Superflex class and the value of the picks. Signing off, Beat Joe.